science is fundamentally international in nature. So I think science has always depended on a free flow of people and ideas. And so we were passionately for the EU because anything that lowers the barrier to mobility is good for science. And I was of the opinion that the government should simply say that EU researchers who are already based in Britain should simply be allowed to stay without any sort of conditions. And I thought this would be, you know, perfectly obvious. And, you know, it would also force the EU's hand, because I don't see what else they could do except to respond similarly.
What might be the impact of Brexit on future funding, not just for the funding, but for people?
I am worried. If we are perceived as an inward-looking country that's not sort of welcoming to the outside world, and that is the impression that some people have got, then I think it's bad. We're in a global market for talent, and we need to attract people from all over the world. On the other hand, if it is suggested that Brexit is a desire on the parts of, a majority of the British to simply take control over their laws, but not actually be against immigration as such, then, we have to look to see how we make immigration easy, and we also have to make sure that we continue our collaborations with the EU.
But are you already hearing doubts from people that believe that they may not get the European funding they need? People
are naturally worried about this, sudden loss of funding, which would be the thing that would sort of make us much less competitive. And I should say, it's not just the funding alone. Most scientists would prefer that funding to be through the EU so that we can be part of these EU networks and large-scale collaborations, because that allows the UK to influence large-scale science throughout Europe, because we're one of the leaders in science in Europe. And if we're isolated, then we won't be able to set the agenda.
But given the strictures at the moment on the economy, what are the chances of getting that money out of the government?
If Britain wants to succeed on its own outside the EU, it can only do so by being an advanced, innovation-based, knowledge-based society. And so there really isn't any alternative to science funding. And if you cut science funding when times are bad, then it takes a very, very long time to restore the science, because scientists leave and then it takes a decade to train a new generation. And so it's very bad value for money to cut science.
But wouldn't we just replace EU funding with global funding that perhaps just now that we haven't sought hard enough?
Over the last 20 or 30 years, because we were part of the EU, we have built up connections, networks, collaborations throughout Europe. Now, to reproduce those sorts of things elsewhere, first of all, the structures have to exist for those sorts of funding. And secondly, we would have to build up networks, and that'll take time.
Did the scientists not shout loud enough during the campaign?
I think a lot of scientists did shout out loud enough, but I don't think this referendum was decided based on what scientists think. In fact, I would venture to guess that it made absolutely no difference to the people who voted to leave. They were concerned more about things like immigration, about control over laws, etc. The question we have to ask is, why did we not, over 3 generations, or at least 2 generations, inculcate in our population a feeling that we're actually all European and not, we're perfectly willing to accept that we're both English and British. But, when it comes to that next step, English, British, and European, many of us fail to make that leap. And I think that's really to me, as someone who's a relative outsider who came here 16 years ago, that's something I've observed.
Thank you very much indeed.